Welcome to Deep Dive with Dr. D. The entire goal of this podcast is to help you see that you have it within you to do amazing things.
And here we are, friends. Thank you for joining me on the podcast. So this is going to be a little bit of a part two. So on Friday, if you want to go back and listen to the last podcast, I shared some of my childhood story. I like to say the crazy of my childhood. So you might want to, before you listen to this one, go back to Fridays. In fact, I'm going to go back and I'm going to actually add part one to that as the title. And then this one will be childhood story part two. So on Friday, I had ended with when we were living in Tacoma. Johnny Revell, who was one of the few very positive role models I had in my life, he had died of cancer at a very young age. And my mom, doing the best she knew how, but continuing the crazy, within 6 months, had married again. And, oh boy, not just married again, but married my uncle. Yep. Pause for effect. You heard it right. My mom remarried within 6 months and married my uncle. Yes. So I had made an error, though, in the timeline because I said at this point that all of my siblings had moved out. And then when mom remarried and married Uncle Tom, who became Uncle Dad, my two cousins, Terry and Kenny, had moved in. But all my siblings had not moved out by this point. My brother Bob had, and my sister Tina, I believe, had just married and moved out. But Sherry still lived at home. I remember that. So we were living in this house on 61st Street in Tacoma. And it was a small house. I think it was a 3-bedroom, 1-bath, not a big house. And my new stepbrother / cousin, Kenny, and I shared a space. My mom had made, I remember we put up curtains literally in the dining room and created a temporary bedroom for us. And my brother Terry, who was now my oldest sibling, my oldest stepbrother / cousin, he got a room. And I'm almost certain Sherry had her own room. And then mom and Uncle Tom, Dad, yes, that is correct. Uncle Tom, Dad, Uncle Dad, it was weird. They had a room. But when I ended the story on Friday, that's kind of where I ended. And this is at a point in my life. I'm 12, 13 years old. I was done trying to be a good kid. The dads of the week had just been too much. There had been too much trauma, too much stuff. And when mom really didn't take her own time to grieve. Like, I didn't clearly see this as a kid. I wasn't able to psychologically see, oh, mom didn't take her. No, but in my brain somewhere, I was just like, this is crazy. This is crazy. I latched on to Kenny, and he was a year older, and he was already in his life kind of gave up on trying in school and was skipping school and we were shoplifting and we started smoking and all of that. It's just a lot of chaos that began. So I also on Friday ended with, I went from being, I think, a really good student. I remember, I think I was almost a straight A student in 7th grade to 8th grade to just started plummeting. I just gave up trying to be a kid because mom's focus primarily during our childhood was really on herself and dads of the week. So when Johnny died, the one man that I really latched onto and he took a positive vested interest in me, when he died and mom didn't take the time to grieve and it was just crazy and married my uncle, I gave up. Alas, we moved again, right? So if you listen to Fridays, you learn we moved a lot. That's what we did. This time, I guess it was kind of a healthy move in that we needed a bigger place because mom married Tom. So I had another dad of the week who was my uncle, and Terry and Kenny, my cousins, moved in who became my stepbrothers. And Sherry, I'm certain she was still living at home. and we needed a bigger house. So we moved across town, not too far away. The house was right by Lincoln High School in Tacoma. And I remember the address. It's still there, 3611 Tacoma Avenue South. Or maybe that was my address when I was an adult. I think I lived in a house on Tacoma in my mid-20s in my first marriage, and I think that was it. That is it. See? So many moves, even into my adulthood. This house was on L Street, I think off of 36th and L Street. And it was a big house. I remember that. It had a basement, it had a main floor, and then it had a second floor. And here you go. Get ready for this. At one point, and this is 1980, 81. I'm in 8th, 9th grade when we lived in this house. The time that we lived in this house, there was one point at which I think we had 13 people living there. So let me see if I can count these out. So in this house, there was Mom and Uncle Tom, Dad. I think I maybe ended up calling him Dad. I don't remember. I don't know. Did I keep calling him Uncle? Did I call him Dad? Not sure. We had Mom, Tom, me, Kenny, Terry, my sister Sherry. Get ready for this. My mom's first husband, Jerry Emerson, who is Tom's brother. He was there for a little bit. My grandma Turco was there for a little bit. My brother Bob came back from the military. I think he came for leave from the Air Force. And then I think for a very short period of time, my sister Tina, so there's 10, and her first husband Rob were in the house. That's 12 people. I'm pretty sure that's what we have. I always remember we had a lot of people living in that house. And yes, you heard that right. For a short period of time, my mom's first husband, Jerry, my oldest brother's biological father, Jerry Emerson, lived in the house when my mom was then married to his brother, my uncle, Tom Emerson, was living there. Yeah, imagine being a kid and just you're like, what is happening here? So we lived in that house. I think I remember the house. I remember going to school. I still went to Stewart Junior High. There's a 7-Eleven on 38th Street, which I used to go to a lot. Again, this is 81, 82-ish. We lived there, I don't know, about a year, because then we moved again from there to Parkland. And, oh gosh. Yeah, we moved into a big house, another house. Jerry moved with us because I remember him living out there. My mom's first husband, her now ex, and Tom Emerson's brother, my uncle, who became my stepdad because my mom married my uncle. We moved out to Parkland, and I remember it was a nice house. It was a Rambler. It's still there. It's on 138th Street, just about a mile off of Pacific Avenue toward what used to be Fort Lewis. And so it was Terry, Kenny, me. I think Sherry had moved out by this point to her first marriage. Grandma Turco, I think she found her own place. But Jerry lived there for a little bit because I remember the car. He actually taught me how to drive. My stepdad, my brother's biological father. So we moved out there, and we didn't stay in that Rambler too long because I remember we ended up moving across the street to a trailer park. We lived in trailer parks along the way. I'm a trailer park kid. Into a nicer trailer because by this time Jerry moved out. So when we moved over to the trailer park, Jerry had moved out. Tina's married and moved out. Bob's long been moved out. Sherry's in her first marriage. She lived in Parkland. And Mom's still with Tom. And we had a small little camper trailer. I remember this. That Terry moved into. That was parked in the trailer park. And I I remember the trailer, but I don't remember my bedroom. I don't know if me and Kenny shared a room. I know me and Kenny spent a lot of time together. We were hanging out. I kind of latched onto his coat strings and I just followed his lead, so to speak. School by this time for me is just a burden. It was I went to Spanaway Lake High School, so this is 1982, 83. I remember going to Spanaway Lake. If for those Gen X kids like me, we had a smoking area outside. I remember the smoking area. And for me, school by this time was really just a burden. It was like I would show up in the morning and then skip school for the whole day. I had a friend, I can't think of his name. Me and him used to go shoplift Mad Dog 2020 and Old English from a Safeway out in Spanaway in the morning. We'd get drunk, go show up at school to look for weed or look for the parties that were going to happen for the weekend. But school was just, I wasn't passing any of my classes. I was truant all the time. And you know what's interesting is I just don't remember, mom or Tom, dad, uncle, whatever we're calling them at this point. I don't remember sitting down and having conversations with them, or I always felt like they were just kind of doing their own thing. The kids in the house weren't a real focus. That's just what I remember or don't remember happening. It's going to be in this podcast that I'm going to bring in a time period of my life that really made things for me really weird in the sexual realm. I was walking. I used to walk everywhere. As kids, kids still walk places, but this is the early 80s, and I'm 13, 14 years old. So just I imagine my grandson who's 14 right now. So this is how I help myself see the kid that I was and what happened. What I'm going to describe to you happened in this period of my life. We're living in Parkland. Again, I described to you the living situation. And I'll never forget, I was walking down 138th Street. I'm not sure what I was doing, just being a kid. And this guy pulled over. And I'll never forget his car. He loved his cars. He had a Honda Accord. This is 1983. It was a new car. And he rolled down his window and he introduced himself. Friendly guy. His name's Lynn Gilmore. I don't know if he's still alive or not. He's well into his 80s by this point, if he is. And he introduced himself and super friendly. Again, I'm 13, 14 max at this time-ish. Maybe 15, but I'm not sure. 82, so 67, 77, 87 is 20. 82 would be 15, so maybe 15. Maybe it was 81, 82. Anyway, he introduces himself, and he's just a super friendly guy, And he's like, hey, do you want to do any yard work? And again, I'm, like, yeah, shoot, I want money. I like to earn money. And so I got in this stranger's car. Literally, I met him on the side of the road, and he took me to his house, which was in Parkland. I started doing some yard work, but that was not what he met me for. That was not his intention. And I'll never forget the first moves he made on me. Again, he didn't want me for yard work. He wanted me for his own personal use. And started touching me sexually. And I'm thinking as I'm recording this, and this is kind of scary. Like, I've done a lot of work in this area of my life. I've done a lot of counseling. And I think, how would I feel as a grown man now, as a dad and a grandfather, if this same thing happened to my grandson? He's 14. He'll be 15 this year. It would disgust me that a grown adult would do this to a child, a teenager. That started a sexually abusive situation for me, and it was really how I earned the money from this guy. I did yard work. I would wash his car, but it was it became a battle for me. And this is the battle that it became, in that I remember having conversations with him and saying, I don't want to do this. I don't, can I just do the yard work? Can we just be friends, right? Without the sexual stuff. And I should also say that I wouldn't call him wealthy, but he had money. He had nice things. He had a nice house. He had retired from the military. He was working for the post office, and he was a realtor. And in his circle, in his people, he was viewed as a very strong figure, meaning he was religious. He went to church all the time. He was a deacon in his church, and he had a lot of rentals. And I actually ended up doing work on his rentals, painting and maintenance. And so I looked up to him in that sense. Weirdly enough, he became a mentor for me. But I always remember having conversations with him about the sexual stuff that I just I don't want to do this. This isn't me. I like women. And this isn't a hit if someone's gay, but I didn't view myself as gay, and I was a kid. I was a fucking kid. And I would say, can we just be friends? And he'd be like, oh yeah, and I was like, this isn't right. And I remember saying, asking him, do you do this with other, boys? Oh no, it's just you. Well, I'll never forget when I went over to his house one time unannounced, and just kind of showed up, and there was another kid there. And I remember asking him about that and saying, well, I thought you said it. Well, he made excuses. And he always did it because he was also religious. And I've never been a really religious guy. I'm like, well, what would God think, about that? He's like, well, it's our thing. It's our deal. And I just never, he was a predator. That's what he was. I remember going through his stuff when he was always paying attention, but I was able to go through some of his things, and I found pictures, and I found, like I said, I went over to his house and there were other guys there. I didn't really plan to bring this up in this podcast, but here it is. I strongly believe in speaking truth to my life as a whole and things that have happened along the way. That relationship with Lynn Gilmore would last until I was 29 years old. When I found it actually kind of ended before that. I would try to end it, but when I was in heavy drug use, I used him as a source of money. But when I found a path to recovery in the mid-90s and started going to counseling and went to therapists to really talk about this area of my life, I 100% ended that relationship with him forever. And I've always wondered how many young teenage boys he found aside from just me. There's that. We'll see how this goes. It's like I always struggle a bit with this area of my life. I talk about being a survivor of sexual abuse. All of my siblings, my sisters are survivors from Jerry Emerson. My brother is a survivor from my biological father, Danny Douglas. I know my mom had her own abuse, and I always wonder because I have periods of my childhood that I just don't remember, and I think there's pretty good reason why. I like to say I always felt like I had this radar. Lynn Gilmore was the primary, much older adult male that I always felt like I had a radar on me for older, creepy, weird men. There were a couple others, and I'm really grateful that I found a path to recovery. I'm not grateful that I ended up using heavy drugs and doing all the craziness that I did, but the fact that it brought me to change my life and find healing and counseling, I'm super, super grateful because that radar shut off. once I found a path to recovery and learned about healthy boundaries and that all of that was just like weird and sick and disgusting, and I've never looked back. I know that I'm not alone in this realm. I know that there are other men who were preyed upon by other adult males, and I say, Len Gilmore was a very religious man. Like he, was really looked on very favorably by those in his world. And had they known all of the things that were happening behind his closed doors, he would not have been looked on as favorably. I'm going to kind of close this one up. I don't agree at all that there's a statute of limitations, and I don't know if the laws have changed for sexual abuse, but there is. In some states, I'm not sure if there are in other states, but I know in Washington State, there's a statute of limitations for this in it, and I don't think that should be the case. Like, there's not a statute of limitations for freaking murder. There's not a statute of limitation for other crimes, but in this area there are. What I want to say is there's hope. That's the whole reason that I do this podcast, is to give people hope. Like, the stories that I share are wild, right? Like that my mom just married so many men. She had so many relationships. We as kids were never shown, healthy behavior. We ended up being victims of the same things that I'm sure my mom was a victim of along the way. And that can sound really sad when I shared the story of me being just a kid walking the streets and this freaking loser, coming on the side of the road, and me not being taught, hey, don't talk to strangers. That's unhealthy. Run, right? Like I was just like a prime target for him. It's almost psychologically, it's like he was weird. The hope is that healing is possible. So if you're a man out there and you happen upon this podcast somewhere along the way, and this hits your brain and your heart, I want you to know that you can heal. I've been able, through therapy, through sharing my story, through trusted people. Like, I don't recommend I don't go out on the streets and share this. Now this is going to be real public on this realm. I've written about this, but I've only been able to do that through healing. And there is hope out there for healing for whatever you've struggled with along the way in your life. I'm going to wrap it up for this one. I hope everyone has a great day. Love to all. As always, thanks for listening. Episodes are released twice a week, Mondays and Fridays. You can also follow me on my other social media channels in the description.